everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver, author of the upcoming Migraine Relief Plan cookbook. Welcome back to the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. In each episode, I make a dish inspired by a new book while talking to its author. Today's book is Amber and Rye, a Baltic Food Journey, and I'm making Greta's Grand's potatoes with kefir and summer vegetables. I'd like to welcome Zuza Zak, author of Amber and Rye. Welcome, Zuza.
Hello, thank you for having me on. It's lovely to be here.
Well, and thank you so much for getting ready and being up late because you're in the UK. So it's wonderful when we have international guests, but I know it's extra work to not be doing it during business hours. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Pleasure.
So this is your second cookbook. Give us an overview. Let's start with the title and then tell us where the Baltics are.
So the Baltics are Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and they are in the northeast of Europe, sort of between Eastern Europe and Scandinavia, which are influences that are really felt in the cuisine there as well. But of course, Baltics also have their own kind of Baltic spirit as well, and they're having a renaissance at the moment, a culinary renaissance. And so it was a particularly exciting time to be writing about the food of that area.
And are you, is your family, are you from there?
I'm from Poland originally, but my grandma came from Lithuania. And there is a story about that in the book as well, because in some ways it's kind of me rediscovering a part of my ancestry and my heritage through the book. So that's like another journey that's happening at the same time as this kind of Baltic food journey is taking place as well.
That's great. And so tell us why Amber and Rye? Why did you choose that as the title?
I think Amber and Rye are two very evocative words for Eastern Europe. And amber was a very important part of the history of that area. And it feels like that's almost like the storytelling aspect of the book, because it's linked to the history. And then we have rye, which is a very hardy, life-giving crop, which has been very important to that area as well.
And just to be clear, when you're talking about amber, you're not talking about the color, you're talking about the stone?
That's right, yes, the kind of resin.
Gotcha. Okay. So I just didn't want anybody to misunderstand that's part of the history because it's used in jewelry, but it's actually a resin. And if you all watched Jurassic Park, that was the mosquito was in amber. That's how they started all that off. Okay, so what kinds of ingredients are common and what can readers expect from the cookbook? And while you explain that, I'm just going to open up and show a couple of pages because it's absolutely beautiful.
Sure. I think in terms of Baltic cooking, they all have each country has their own kind of culinary traditions, but they do have ingredients in common that I think makes them easy to kind of have to talk about Baltic cooking. So ingredients, of course, grains are very important. Rye is, I would argue, the most important just because it's such a hardy grain that can withstand the cold temperatures and the cold winters. But also barley is important over there, and buckwheat, kasha. It's toasted buckwheat especially is a very kind of strong taste over there, which is kind of the brown stuff. Then we have, of course, the fish from the Baltics, and herrings are a really big one, which is great because they're actually quite a sustainable fish. So it's quite a timely moment to be using herrings. And then we have from the forest, mushrooms and berries. And then things like curd cheese is also very common in all three countries. This kind of, I think you call it farmer's cheese in America, which is a sort of white cheese. It's a fresh kind of one, and it's quite tangy. And then we have fermented things. So that kind of really sour taste is, I think, something that's also quite significant in Baltic cooking.
Great. So, for example, there's a recipe for fried sauerkraut. A lot of the recipes use kefir. How do you pronounce it over there? Because I've heard it both ways, and I kind of mess it up when I initially introduced it. I know in America it's usually pronounced kefir. How do you pronounce it?
In Polish, it's kefir. I think that's right. I think, yeah.
Okay, great. So, do you have a favorite recipe? I know it's like asking if you have a favorite child, but I'm going to ask anyway.
It's definitely difficult to choose a favorite recipe. I would say I have favorite ones at different times of the year and depending on mood. And at the moment, recently, I just made a delicious rye bread and chocolate mousse, which is a dessert based on the traditional Estonian black bread soup. It's called a soup, but it's really more of a mousse, and it goes really well with chocolate, which isn't in the kind of very traditional recipe. But I did have it in an Estonian restaurant, and the two flavors just marry so well together. The kind of really dark bread, and of course depends on what kind of dark sourdough rye you're using as well, so every time it tastes a little bit different. Out of the breakfasts, well, the hemp butter is always a favorite, and then that's a very traditional Latvian product that the travelers used to use to kind of have a nutritious spread that didn't really go off or anything. So that's made from unhulled hemp seeds, but you can also make it from hulled ones. And then I make cookies from it as well. So I think that's probably the most made recipe in my book, because those cookies are really easy to make and they're really kind of nutritious as well.
I mean, I know it's so hard to choose a favorite, but that I think that it gives our watchers a sense of how different the recipes are to ones that we might be familiar with in the U.S., which is why I wanted to feature the book. I didn't know anything about Baltic cuisine. I had to remind myself where the Baltic states were, that they're kind of across the Baltic Sea from Norway and Sweden. So you can kind of understand, if you're at all familiar with those kind of cuisines, that there might be some crossover. And Microwave Boy and I were able to go to Eastern Europe 2 years ago before everything shut down, and very much enjoyed the food there. And so I was looking forward to seeing how similar it was, and there are definitely some similar flavors. So the recipe today I'm making today is Greta's Grand's potatoes. So they're fried potatoes with kefir and summer vegetables. So tell us, as I'm assembling it, I'm going to showcase what everything is. So the fried potatoes are on the stove. I'll get those in a moment. So we have the kefir. We have green onions, very thinly sliced radishes, halved cherry tomatoes, some freshly minced dill, and cucumber. So why don't you go ahead and explain who Greta's Gran is and how you developed this recipe, and then I'm going to go ahead and assemble everything and plate it.
Sure. Well, Greta is a Lithuanian who I met in a London cafe, actually. I met her on Instagram, and then we met in a London cafe to discuss Lithuanian food. And there was actually a recipe she wanted to share with me, which is her sort of speciality. It's this kind of cake. However, when we got to talking about kind of savoury food, she talked about this recipe that her gran used to make when they spent summers on her dacha. And she would stay in this little house next to the vegetable garden, just so she would look out onto the vegetable garden, and they would pick the vegetables from that vegetable garden and just make this kind of very simple dish from those vegetables. And as soon as she talked about it, it really reminded me of one I used to eat as well, with potatoes and dill and radishes and cucumber, with kefir on the side. And it's just such an East European flavour. And my grandma came from Lithuania as well, so there are a lot of similarities there. So yeah, it was just such a simple, rustic, delicious, seasonal kind of dish. And that's how it came about.
That's great. So I'm just plating up the potatoes. I'm going to show those off before I top. So you can see they were boiled yesterday and then sat in the the fridge overnight. Then I quartered them because that's the only difference really that I made from this is I really like the lots of crispy surfaces. I'm assuming it would be served where the potatoes are warm and then this is all chilled, and so it's kind of that contrast of the two textures. Is that right, Zuza?
Yes, that's correct. It's really lovely to have that kind of contrast between the warm and the cold. And so it's quite refreshing, but it's also quite kind of homely and comforting at the same time.
How did I do?
That looks beautiful.
Yay.
That looks delicious. I wish I had it
I know.
in front of me.
That's the hard thing.
I do have it in front of me, but not.
Everybody always says, "Oh, I wish I could taste the food." I'm like, I know, that's the one thing that's not happening on the show. So I'm going to try to get a bite of everything, which is not going to be dainty.
How does that taste?
Oh, it's so delicious. Tell us why kefir and not yogurt. Is kefir more common in the Baltics because they're both a fermented milk product?
Yes, kefir is very common throughout the Baltics, actually, and I don't know if it's eaten on a daily basis, but in some parts of the Baltics, definitely. In Estonia, for example, you might just have kama, which is a sort of a mixture of grains ground to a flour, and they just stir that into some kefir, have it either sweet or salty, and that could be like a breakfast or a snack or something like that. Love affair with fermented foods, which have sustained them throughout the colder months, and now have proved to be very healthy, actually.
Right, they're full of probiotics, which is fantastic, and and I love that. I love the kefir taste, the yogurt taste. All those are happy to me. So when I tasted it, so what I got was the crispy edges of the potatoes, and they're fried with dill. So you get that kind of two layers of the dill flavor, the kind of cooked dill where it's richer, and then that bright, fresh, herby dill on top. And then you've got the crunchy cucumber, the slight bitterness from the radish, the sourness of the kefir. So it's really just a beautifully balanced dish. And I would never have thought to make it. It's not something I would ever put together. So that's partly why I love this show, is I learn about these cultures and cuisines that I don't know anything about, and it broadens my horizon. So I hope, Zuza, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. It was an absolute pleasure to be there. And if I may just add, if you have some sauces left at the end of it, it's quite nice to mop them up with some crusty bread.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Oh, the other tip I'll say is, besides quartering the potatoes, is I would recommend, if you're not going to eat it all at one time, to keep them separate so the potatoes don't get soggy. So I would just plate as you're going to eat it and keep the two things, because you can see this is very kind of saucy and watery, and you don't want to take that crispness off the potatoes. So you'll find the recipe link in the Facebook video or on my website, migrainereliefrecipes.com. Find her at zuzazak.com, and she's working on a third cookbook, which I'm sure will be beautiful. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. You can order a copy of Amber and Rye wherever you like to buy books, and if you don't have a book buying budget right now, please think about ordering from your local library, because they buy the books and that helps authors too. Follow me at sweavermph and like my Facebook page so you don't miss an episode. Join us next time for another author interview and a dish inspired by their book. Thanks so much for watching The Blue and Yellow Kitchen.